public now. And before we go to you and Brunel Desep and Mr. McLean, I would like to, and Mr. Chang. So Madam Jahid, let me write it down, Mr. Brunel Desep, and Mr. McLean and Mr. Chang. Before I go to you, Madam Jahid, I have a special announcement to make. Mr. Stephen Barrett, who has 20 years of service yesterday, I want committee members to join me and congratulating Mr. Barrett for 20 years of service. So I have the 4 speakers on the list: Madam Jahid, Mr. Brunel Desep, Mr. McLean, and Mr. Chang. Madam Jahid, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move my motion, which was put on notice on Wednesday, May 8, 2024, as the Home Child Care Pilot and Home Support Worker Pilot programs will expire on June 17, 2024, and the caregiver community is very concerned about what will follow the expiry of these programs, that the committee shall prioritize the caregiver study adopted December 12, 2023, scheduling and completing this study as its next order of business.
Point of order, Chair.
Brunel Desep.
On est bien sur la lettre sur l'Afghanistan.
This is about the letter to Afghanistan, about Afghanistan? Look, the subject was the letter about Afghanistan, no?
Because now we moved into public.
Right.
This is a new meeting, and so I have a list of speakers: Madam Jahid, then Mr. Brunel Desep, then Mr. McLean, Mr. Chang, Mr. Radikov, Mr. Ali, and Madam Kwan. So these are the speakers list. So the floor is with Madam Jahid.
Yeah, so I would really like to get the study started on the caregiver. As we all know that in Canada we have 1 million strong Canadians of Filipino origin who have called Canada as their home. These 2 pilot projects were launched in 2019, and these 2 pilot projects are coming to an end on June 17th. Although the minister has announced another 2 pilot projects, but it is really very important that we do this study, listen to the witnesses, and make sure that we provide the government with important recommendations for these 2 programs. Today is a very special day for Canadians of Filipino origin, June 12th, and I was just part of the Filipino flag raising where Canadians of Filipino origin from coast to coast to coast were here as we raise the flag. So Canadians of Filipino origin have done important contributions to this country. Today we celebrated the 126th anniversary of the Philippines, as well as 75 years of the diplomatic relationships between Canada and Philippines. And today, like this month, is also June, Filipino Heritage Month. I brought motion 155, which declared June as Filipino Heritage Month, and I know it is really very important for all members here on this in this committee, because that motion 155 received unanimous consent on October 30th, 2018, and since then we have been celebrating June as Filipino Heritage Month. Filipinos have made important contributions in making these 2 programs. As part of that program, many parents can go out to work just because they have caregivers to look after their young kids. We can leave our parents at home and go to work without worrying about their parents, because we have caregivers who are there to look after our elderly parents and grandparents. So I think based on all what the caregivers have contributed to our economy, have allowed many Canadians to be able to contribute towards the economy and be able to go out to the work from their home just because we have the caregivers who are taking care of our young kids or our elderly parents and grandparents. It is really very important that we have a permanent program for both these streams. The caregivers who take care of our young kids, as well as the caregivers who take care of our elderly parents and grandparents. We have been delaying a program for a very long time, and when we announced the 2 pilot projects back in 2019, and because of this changeover, there are a lot of caregivers who have lost status. And I know I hope my colleagues will agree with me, because I know that the Canadians of Filipino origin, the caregiver community, is really very important for many of us. I know I've been traveling from coast to coast to coast to listen to the Filipino community, and me and MP Redicop have been together in Saskatoon also. I know like Saskatoon is also a home to a very vibrant Filipino community. We were together at one of the festival in August 2022, and I think we heard from many people there how important these programs are and how important these programs are for the Filipino community. It's a 1 million strong community. So I really request all members, I think many people are listening to us right now, seeing us. And on a very special day today, of June 12th, the day of independence of the Philippines, I think there will not be a better day to decide about doing this important study. I have represented Scarborough Centre riding since 2015. I represent a very vibrant Filipino community. Close to 18,000 Filipinos have called Scarborough Centre as their home. And stories which I have heard at my constituency office are like, at times you feel so bad that like you have to hear from caregivers how they had to leave their loved ones, their young kids, their spouses back home to come here to look after our kids, look after our parents and grandparents. I've heard from many caregivers who have lost status and are not able to work. So many caregivers have been like vulnerable at the hands of the employers. I'm thankful to our minister that like now we are allowing that like these 2 pilot projects which were announced back in 2019 that allowed them to bring their immediate family members along with them and don't have to leave them. Like imagine if we put ourselves in their shoes, if we have to leave our loved ones, our children back home and come to Canada to look after the loved ones, the children, and the parents and grandparents, how would we feel being without the families? I think family reunification is really very important. So there are a lot of aspects why we need to do this study. We need to listen to the witnesses from the caregiver community so that we can make some important recommendations to the government so that we can land on some permanent programs. I know Minister Miller announced new enhanced caregiver pilot programs building on the success of the home child care provider and home support worker pilots. The new pilots will allow caregivers to continue to come to Canada as we work towards making the caregiver pilot program permanent. As well as these new pilot programs will provide caregivers with permanent residence upon their arrival in Canada, allowing them to have a clear and straightforward path to permanent status. Not only that, but this will make it easier for caregivers to find proper work with reliable employers and have clear, straightforward access to permanent resident status as soon as they arrive in Canada. In addition, after hearing from stakeholders, advocacy groups, and caregivers themselves, we are lowering the language requirements also from Canadian language benchmark CL5 to CL4 because many caregivers have not been able to get their permanent residency because they were not able to meet the language requirement. So we heard a lot in the last many years about the issue of the language requirement. So I am glad that through these pilot programs, candidates interested in working in Canada's home care sector will be eligible to apply if they meet the criteria like the language requirements, hold the equivalent of a Canadian high school diploma, have recent and relevant work experience, and if they have received an offer for a full-time home job. Caregivers play a critical role in supporting Canadian families. As such, we owe it to them to ensure our programs reflect their invaluable contributions. These measures provide a more stable and secure pathway for caregivers from abroad as they arrive in Canada. It's really very important to note that there has been new developments to this study, but it is also important that we study it. We need to listen to the caregivers, listen to the testimonies to make sure that we can make recommendations so that the government can bring some permanent programs. Because like this uncertainty of pilot programs, I think, causes anxiety among so many caregivers because since 2019, when we announced these two programs, as they were pilot, I've been hearing at my constituency office as well as from many other communities across Canada that what will happen once these programs expire. So I think the caregiver community is looking forward to us to look, hear them, and make sure that we have some permanent programs so that there is stability. They know that these are the permanent programs, and they would be able to serve here as caregivers, I think, in a better situation when they don't have that on their mind that maybe what will happen when these programs expire as they are just a pilot project. I think as I represent very vibrant Filipino community, and they have contributed in all sectors for the Canadian economy. I have like amazing restaurants like F.V. Foods, where people from like across GTA come to enjoy the Filipino culture and cuisine. I have many other restaurants like small businesses. So in all walks of life, like the Filipino Canadians of Filipino origin are contributing, and it is important that our support is there for them, for the caregiver sector. Imagine like how many Canadians will not be able to go out to work if we don't have caregivers looking after their young kids. So my request would be that we really look into it. And as the motion of MP Ali is already there, we prioritize this because it's important that we show it to the Filipino community, we show it to the caregivers that we care about them. We are not taking them for granted. So based on these recommendations, I think and the importance of having these, it's really very important that this is scheduled ASAP and schedule these meetings, start listening to the caregivers. Like I tell you, like all these stories which I have heard in my constituency office and across Canada need to be heard by all the committee members and need to be seen. So I'm glad that like Minister has announced these programs, but based on the need, it is really important that we have a long-term plan and a long-term program for the caregiver community. It cannot be a better month than June to start this study ASAP. So my request would be that if we can start that study.
Are you done with it, Madam Jahid?
I can add to it that they. No.
You know me, okay? I don't want to get in trouble. Mr. McLean, I have to make sure.
Juste un petit point d'ordre pendant que ma collègue.
Point of order while my colleague tries to find her train of thought, give her a chance to find where she's at in her thinking and in what she's sharing with us. But just quickly, a point of order, I would like to point out, kind colleague, that given that this motion is of great importance to her, we should perhaps vote about it immediately. Otherwise, we may run out of time, and people whom she's defending may have the impression that she is just using their story as a means to obstruct parliamentary business. And so I think it would be important to move to a vote on this motion as quickly as possible.
Or back to Madam Yahid. Madam Yahid, please continue.
So as we work to implement a permanent caregiver program, I know these two pilot projects which have been announced will help not only improve support for caregivers but also provide families with quality care they deserve. The government says that eligible caregivers will be able to work for organizations that provide temporary or part-time care for individuals, such as those receiving care while recovering from injury or illness. We all saw that speaking in Toronto this Monday afternoon, the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees said the pilots could launch as soon as this fall. These updated programs replace the two other pilot programs that the minister said brought thousands of caregivers to Canada, but which are slated to wrap up on June 17th, 2024. While these pilots have attracted many qualified individuals and their families in Canada and help provide in-home care, the need for caregiver continues. Like that was said by Minister Miller, which indicated the government has been talking to caregivers and stakeholders to look at ways of improving the support these programs provide for newcomers. Miller said that Canada's aging demographics, there is an increasing need for caregivers to support people. I have seen in my own riding, I have 7 long-term care units, and majority of the people who are PSWs or caregivers taking care of those elderly people in the long-term cares are Filipinos. Their contributions are really great, and we saw during the pandemic that all the issues which we had to face in the long-term cares, all the Canadians were really worried about their parents and grandparents who were living in the long-term cares. Who was taking care of them when we had issues? It was the caregivers, many of them coming from the Filipino community. We really owe them a lot. And as Minister Miller also recognized while announcing these pilot projects, that we have an aging population in Canada. This is something that is an increasing reality, not a decreasing one. That's what he mentioned. He noted many of the caregivers who come to Canada to take this work on are women, some of whom are being separated from their own families when moving abroad to take care of others. I have heard stories which make all of us cry when we hear from the caregivers that they have not been able to see their young kids for 4 years, for 5 years. These stories are there, and it is really important that we pay priority to that. I know this motion which my colleague and good friend Mr. MP Ali brought on December, which was adopted by this committee on December 12, 2023, has been delayed for all this session because other things have been coming up. I know we have done important work in the committee, but it is really very important that we do not delay this study for a very long time. The 5-year pilot projects, which were first launched in 2019 and were aimed at bringing foreign caregivers into the country to care for children, seniors, and people with disability are being replaced, are expiring on June 17th. The new pilots, which the government says are a move towards establishing a permanent caregiver program in Canada, addresses some long-held concerns that critiques of the country approach to foreign caregivers have spent years highlighting. People have been working for decades on the demand to ensure that migrant workers arrive with permanent resident status to Canada. This was said by Amanda Aziz, an immigration and refugee lawyer with the Migrant Worker Center in Vancouver. This is for the most part because caregivers and care workers are faced with such abuse and exploitation in the context of their employment. We know, we have tried, in Canada, we have tried different caregiver programs. At times we have seen that, it should be just employer, particular employer associated, not open ones. We saw how much abuse the caregivers had to face when their work permits were tied to the employers. We have been trying for years different programs and have not been able to land on a permanent program in the last many years for our caregiver community. I think that's not fair with the caregivers who are putting so much into that profession. They give their life to that profession, and either keeping them away from their loved ones or seeing the abuse which they have to face. I think it's really very important that we give them some sort of certainty so that their anxiety level goes down. That's why I really want that we should do this study. When I go back in the summer to my constituents and start hearing those stories again, what am I going to tell them? That for this whole session, we were not able to schedule meetings on an important issue, and especially in this month of June, where this month has been recognized unanimously to recognize the contributions of the Canadians of the Filipino origin here in Canada. I know, Mark Miller, the Minister for Immigration, has also announced other highly anticipated changes to language and education requirements to qualify for the new pilots, which are set to launch sometimes between this fall and early 2025. Where applicants previously needed to demonstrate a language proficiency of level 5 in either English or French, that requirement has now been dropped to level 4. Education requirements have also been lowered. Caregivers previously needed to have the equivalent of at least 1 year of post-secondary education or a foreign educational credential equivalent. Under the incoming pilots, the equivalent of a Canadian high school diploma will be sufficient, along with the recent and relevant work experience. Also, an offer for a full-time home care job is also required in these two programs. Through the streams, caregivers will also be able to work for organizations that offer part-time care for people who are recovering from injury or illness and those who are not fully independent. I know, my colleague MP Kwan, we have been on this committee since 2015, told the Star the changes which she said she has pushed Ottawa to adopt will also stop caregivers from being separated from their families by opening up more ways for them to bring relatives to Canada. And she also said that I've been advocating for this for over 30 years now, and so today announcement that they will finally respect and honor caregivers and value their work is extremely welcome. So I think it is really very important that based on what all I have said and what all the Filipino community has contributed to the economy of this country, and especially in the caregiver sector, and especially recognizing that June is Filipino Heritage Month, it's important that my motion should be taken into consideration and start this important study. Thank you, Chair.
It is 6:30? No, not yet. Okay. So are you done?
Yes.
Okay, so we go to Mr. Bruno de Sepp.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, I would call for adjournment of debate, and then I will pick up right after that as soon as we voted on adjourning that debate.
Motion to adjourn the debate. And so I will ask the clerk to take the vote.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Madam Kaibaga, you are on a point of order.
Yeah, he's moving a motion to adjourn debate, and then he's putting himself on the speaker list, and we all have our hands up right now, so he can't do that. If he's using his slot to move.
non, vous avez raison, vous avez raison. OK, vous
Yes, you're quite right. I'm sorry, you're right.
I
There's
can
many of us who have
clear
our
it
hands
up. As soon as he brings in a motion to adjourn the debate, then his spot is gone. Then I have to move on to the next person. Okay? All right. So we are in between the vote. So Mr. Clerk, call the vote.
So the motion is to adjourn the debate of the motion of Ms. Zaid. Mr. Ali.
No.
Mr. Chang.
No.
Monsieur El Khoury.
Je vote non.
Madame Kayabaga. Je n'ai pas entendu Madame Kayabaga.
I've not heard Ms. Kayabaga.
Non. Madame Zaid. Ms.
No.
Mr. Kimmich.
Yes.
Mr. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. McLean.
Ooh.
Mr. Riddicup.
Yes.
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe.
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
Yes.
Yeas 6, nays 5.
The debate is adjourned, and the floor is with Mr. McLean. And it is at 6:30
Thank you very much,
now.
Mr. Chair, and I
Just a
appreciate
minute,
having the
just a
floor
minute,
here. Thank you
Mr.
very much.
I have to do some housekeeping as I'm a chair.
It's time left here, Mr. Chair. So let me
it's 6:30.
let me make a motion here quickly.
It's at
that
6:30. I have to take. Is there a unanimous consent
no.
to adjourn the meeting?
No.
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 Okay. And then suspend the meeting. Then you-